Welcome back to another PT Pearl. I'm Doc Jen.
And I'm Dr. Dom.
And this is from the Optimal Body Podcast. And today I am actually going to go into a little bit of my journey with pain, injury, and Dom is actually going to interview me and just explain what's been going on and how I'm working on it today.
Back on your childhood, what did movement mean to you?
I feel like I've talked about this so many times, but I mean, obviously there's probably people who don't know. I was actually required to be in a sport growing up from my parents, which some people hear that and they're like, oh, required, but I'm super grateful for it. I mean, so many lessons can be learned through sports, you know? And I had the opportunity to try out a bunch and see what I liked. And I stumbled upon gymnastics and immediately fell in love. I did do it for about 9 years growing up, and I retired at 16. And because I think I didn't extend into like later high school and into college, I probably quit before I got really severely injured, because I have some friends who have gone through 4 knee surgeries, who have gone through back surgery, shoulder, you know. And for me, I am so grateful that I walked away from gymnastics I sprained my ankle, and from that moment that I sprained it, I always taped it. I fractured and dislocated my thumb, but luckily it was my thumb.
Right. Could be worse bones in the body to break.
Could be much worse.
Right.
And to today, it's a little like hypermobile from the other one, but that's probably the coolest thing that I have going on there. And I pulled my hip flexors a bunch, and did have some residual things that we can talk about with that. But otherwise, and some wrist pain, where I wore wrist guards for every day in gymnastics. But other than that, like, I walked away with not having like severe back issues, severe knee issues, shoulder issues that I know a lot of gymnasts deal with. And I'm just honestly grateful in my body for what I've experienced.
Also, coaches a lot of the times, especially in gymnastics, sometimes I hear it just like, oh, it's probably fine, right?
100%. I mean, even that happened with my thumb. My coach said, oh, you jammed it, you'll probably be fine. And that night I couldn't even like button my pants. And so my mom was like, well, let's just take you in just to get an x-ray and see. And then that's when we saw the fracture. Right.
And do you think that that's an inherent issue, because then kids who might want to speak up about something going on in their body are being taught to not listen to some of these alarm signs?
Yes.
I mean, I kind of led you with the question.
You did.
But
but it is true. And I think it's changing a little bit now. Like, even being a physical therapist, people always say, oh, did you have a great physical therapist? And I did not go to physical therapy once throughout my gymnastics journey. Yeah. Which is really crazy. But now it's a lot more common to go see a physical therapist, no matter what sport you're going into. There is like this fear point of like, you don't want to sit out of gymnastics because you don't want to get behind. And then you don't want to not be doing the skills with your team and progressing and all this stuff. So you do want to listen to the coaches when they're like, you're probably fine. Tape it up, get back up, you're good.
Totally. I mean, I know as an athlete, when I was younger, the last thing I wanted to do was ever sit out, and any pain that I had was hidden. And no matter how bad it hurt, I wanted to be on the field. So I can absolutely agree as an athlete with that sentiment, even though I know what I know now as an adult. So, you know, whatever. Hopefully that gets to be something that coaches and people leading athletics or development of athletes starts to preach in more and more. And I know that there are a lot of organizations that do that.
So as I said, I strained my hamstring, or not my hamstring, my hip flexor. And that's all I knew was that, my hip flexor hurts. So I actually switched legs in doing leaps on the other side so that I didn't have to extend that one hip. So I just did leaps on the other side. Yeah, exactly. And that's how I worked through it. I just gave it rest and did leaps on the other side, which is so funny. So getting out of gymnastics, anything that I would flex my leg, meaning my knee coming up to my chest, would hurt severely.
So this hip flexion starts to become a huge issue. You know, was this at the point where you were already going into PT stuff? What did you figure out? Like, where was your restriction that then helped you start to realize, oh, here's how I can work through some of this?
So it was when I got into PT school, and I would say it was when I also started to meet some different types of movers in the world. That's when Instagram started to grow, and I started, that was one of the most amazing things about Instagram. I started to connect with so many different movers of different aspects and learn a lot of different things, develop mentors, all of that.
Totally.
And one of the things that was getting more brought up was this idea of hip internal rotation.
Yeah.
And I always knew that I kind of lacked hip external rotation, like butterfly stretch. My knees would be like up high all through gymnastics. However, the only stretch I remember really going into was pigeon and not really ever addressing hip internal rotation. And when I actually assessed myself, I was like, oh my God, I have no hip internal rotation and not great hip external rotation either. So maybe no wonder my hip flexor is taking over everything, because it's powering my hip joint right now. And when I actually started to dive into that and work on hip internal and external rotation, my hip pain has completely gone away. I went on a long bike ride in grad school with friends in Chicago, no hip pain. And I really haven't dealt with it since.
So I also know that the rotation at your hips, right, it affects us down through the knees. And a lot of the times you have told me, at least, oh, you need to look at my patella. You need to look at my squinting patella. Can you talk to us about this squinting patella and why that might be something significant just to at least mention or be aware of?
Yeah, because I always thought it was like, I was the person also in grad school who would get pointed out like, oh, look, she's got squinting patella. Her feet are kind of dropped in pronation. And for those who are watching on YouTube, I'll just stand up real quick so that people can see. So if I really just relax, my kneecaps kind of squint toward each other. So that's what squinting patella means. I think it's gotten a little bit better, and I'll show on YouTube too, when I just change positions of my feet or my hips, it changes position of my kneecaps. So if I were to just really focus on actively lifting through my feet and kind of contracting into a short arc position, it changes the position of where my kneecap is at rest, and they're not really like squinting in toward each other. And then if I now just squeeze my glutes and externally rotate through my upper legs, then also that changes the position of my kneecaps, my patella. So all of that to say, I actually haven't had a lot of knee issues, which I'm super grateful for. I've felt moments, like if I haven't run for a while and I go out on a run, and at the very beginning of the run, I can kind of feel like a little bit of that, what we call patellofemoral syndrome, which we've gone over before, right at the front of that kneecap sometimes, but it goes away so quickly. And I contribute that a lot to just the awareness of what my feet are doing, what my hips are doing when I'm doing movement, and being aware where my limitations in my mobility am. Have I been working on it? Have I been working on my feet, my hips, all of that, so that once I start to load and get into these activations, I can actually support through my knee.
Yeah, and I think that this points out something that we like to talk about a lot, that the position or the image doesn't necessarily equate to the symptoms. Scoliosis, right? It's another thing that kind of came into your picture, that all of a sudden someone said, oh, hey, you have this. And it's like, okay, now all of a sudden I have this new thing I've been given. What do I do with it? So when you initially kind of had that diagnosis of, oh, you have scoliosis, can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, that was funny. I did, as Dom mentioned, I talked about it on the scoliosis episode. So especially if you experience
9, I think,
scoliosis or anything, go listen to that. Great podcast that we did, and kind of explain what that is and why. When I saw it, I literally thought he was joking, because it was an S curve through my back and then some forward head posture. So some straightening through my neck area, which your neck should have this natural curve that kind of comes up and back like a C. And I was kind of lacking in that. And it was just shocking. I didn't have pain. I was teaching Pilates. I was learning acro yoga. I competed in calisthenics. Like, there's just so many things that I was doing when moving with my body, and no pains, and putting my body in crazy positions. So when I got that diagnosis, at first it was like, he just told me, maintain your strength, you're good, you don't feel any pain. He basically said, don't get obese. And I'm like, okay, cool. Great. Well, what I think was super cool, when I felt like the it was also going through grad school, and I was starting to learn about pain science a lot more. And we also talked about this in another podcast when we talked about acute versus chronic pain. So again, if you want to go back and listen to that one, good episode. But it was when I got in a car accident where everyone was fine, but I felt my right shoulder blade immediately flare up. And I was like, oh my God, that's so cool, because I'm in stress right now. And so that's why it's happening. And the moment that I adjusted is the moment it went away. And what that also gave me was a tool to relate to clients. Like, when are you feeling this pain? What kind of environment are you in? And can you notice and maybe recognize in your own life that that is a stressor for you? And maybe that's why in this moment you're experiencing a little bit more pain. So putting attention of where my breath is coming from into that rib cage and getting it out of this stress response in my shoulder. And that's when, if my body is so used to utilizing my neck, my shoulder, what we call like our scalenes around, the neck, and that kind of puts pressure down into the nerves that come out in that area. And that can cause different positional changes to feel something different. So like if I do my hair, my hand will start to go numb sometimes. Or if I'm doing a handstand for over a minute, my hand will start to go numb. So I notice these different positions. But if I go back to the breath, if I go back to the rib cage, and I'm actually diligent about working on those things, working on my mobility through my rib cage and my upper back, it changes the game for how I feel. And now you've noticed and caught me sleeping with my arms above my head.
Right? And your hands aren't asleep when you wake up in the morning.
They're not asleep. It's like the most amazing thing.
Our body talks to us in many ways. And the more consistently and the more intently that we start listening to it, you can start picking up some pretty cool things.
100%. And my one message, my consistent message is always, we spend time listening to other people and say that you're worth listening to, and trying to figure out all the answers from someone else. But the reality is, you are worth listening to within your body. And we get to give that respect back and trust it along the journey, like you really know. Thanks so much for sticking around and listening to my story and my journey within my body. Thank you to Dom for asking those questions and really getting, that message out. And I think hopefully it will help support you. If you have any questions, if you related to anything, comment below. Make sure you subscribe, because we're going to be talking about a lot of pain and other diagnoses that happen within the body along this journey.